Good morning. The September 15th, 2021 meeting of the Board of Estimates is now called to order. In the interest of promoting health and safety as we continue to battle with COVID-19 pandemic, the Board of Estimates will continue to meet virtually. At this time, I'd like to call on Comptroller Henry for any corrections, additions, or noted abstentions from today's agenda.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are no changes or corrections on today's agenda. The following protests were received on page 72. Bureau of the Budget and Management Research, General Fund Supplemental Appropriation, $6.5 million for Police Service 622, Police Patrol for premium pay. A protest was received from Bikemore at 2:45 p.m. after the 12 p.m. deadline. The following items are being deferred. On page 53, Department of Finance, Bureau of Risk Management, First Amendment to the Professional Services Agreement with Willis Towers Watson Southeast Incorporated, deferred from today until September 22nd, 2021. The following items are moved to the non-routine agenda. On pages 54 and 55, Bureau of the Budget and Management Research, carryover of unexpended appropriations for fiscal 2021. On page 72, Bureau of the Budget and Management Research, General Fund Supplemental Appropriation, $6.5 million for Police Service 622, Police Patrol for premium pay. On page 79, Bureau of the Budget and Management Research, General Fund Supplemental Appropriation in the amount of $1,499,509.74 to MR Convention Complex, Service Number 855, Convention Center. Page 83, Bureau of the Budget and Management Research, General Fund Supplemental Appropriation in the total amount of $7.1 million for Department of Planning, Service 765, Planning for a Sustainable Baltimore for COVID-19 food insecurity response. There are the following abstentions that have been received by the board. The Honorable Mayor Brandon Scott is abstaining on page 34, item number 1, Health Department Agreement with the Johns Hopkins University. Pages 34 to 35, items number 2 and 3, Health Department Ratification with the Johns Hopkins University. And page 36, item number 5, Health Department Second Amendment to Transfer Agreement with the Johns Hopkins University. The Honorable President Nick Mosby is abstaining on pages 44 to 45, Baltimore City Council President Governmental Charitable Solicitation Application, and page 77, Bureau of the Budget and Management Research, General Fund Supplemental Appropriation. There are no other abstentions, no votes, and no rejection of recommended awards.
Thank you, Mr. Comptroller. I now direct the board's attention to a memorandum from my office dated September the 13th, 2021, identifying matters to be considered as routine agenda items today, together with any corrections and additions that have been noted from the Comptroller. I will now entertain a motion to approve all items contained on the routine agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The routine agenda is now adopted. Now on to the non-routine agenda, the first and only item. Well, it's not the only item, but we're going to conflate all of this. So Bob, if you can talk about, all of the issues that we're going to, that the Comptroller noted. So the hazard pay, the convention center, and food supplement. But the first item, and then again, we talked about all of this is going to come over the carryover part of this discussion. On the routine agenda today can be found on page 54, 55, Bureau of Budget Management Research, carryover of unexpended appropriations from fiscal year 2021. Viewers may have noticed that on today's routine agenda, the number of items from BBMR involving supplemental appropriations. That together with this item bring the fiscal year 2021 budget in balance into a close. The Comptroller and I have each had the opportunity to be briefed by BBMR's recommended budget closeout actions, and the council will be considered supplemental appropriations in the near future. I wanted to pull this particular item out today, the benefit of viewing, listening audience, so that the public can understand the briefing and overview that BBMR provided to us specific to the budget closeout actions as a whole. We have Budget Director Bob Senemy on to provide us with that feedback. As discussed, Bob, not only talk about it from a page 54 and 55 fiscal year carryover, but also as the items that the comptroller noted, page 72, the BPD hazard pay, as well as page 79, the convention center. And then lastly, Bob, page 83, food supplement budget. So Bob, at this point, I yield the floor to you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. This is Bob Senemy, Budget Director for the city, and happy to respond to those notes. So first, maybe it'd be helpful just take a step back and give just a quick high-level summary of all the actions that are coming to the board today. I'd also encourage folks listening, we did a full presentation to the City Council Ways and Means Committee yesterday on this, which I think would provide a good summary as well. But in total, at the end of the fiscal year, the city must be balanced in its general fund in total, and all of the individual city agencies must be in balance and not exceed their appropriation. If their spending does exceed their appropriation, we're required by law to come forward and ask for additional appropriation to be passed by the board and the council. So the package of supplementals that you see today, it's by far the largest we've ever had, certainly in my career. The reason for that is that early on in the fiscal year, the COVID-19 emergency became more dire, and we received aid from the federal government from what we call the CARES Act, and we also became eligible to apply for reimbursement for certain programs through FEMA reimbursement. And so the city, was very aggressive at responding to the COVID-19 pandemic to make sure, city agencies were taken care of and were treated fairly and safely, that our employees were safe. We created some programs to help, organizations or residents in need in our city. And so the city, acted very aggressively to get that rolling. What that meant was that there were certain agencies that were running those programs that had put them over their normal budgeted appropriation. And remember, our budget this year didn't consider the CARES or the FEMA, the COVID response spending yet, because it was still early on in the pandemic. So the package that you see today is basically using either CARES money, FEMA money to pay back for those particular costs. And then there are a handful of other items in the mix too, where we're using general fund revenue to close out items for agencies where they were affected in some way by COVID-19, but CARES or FEMA did not pay for the cost. So to the specific items that you mentioned on the BPD pay. So early on in the pandemic, the city made a decision, I think it was the right decision in retrospect, to provide some level of what we call premium or hazard pay to certain frontline employees. And the reason for that was, there was a lot of risk in the early days of the pandemic. I mean, our employees, some of them that were dealing with directly with the public, were at risk, and we felt like it was the right thing to do and the appropriate thing to do to compensate them in some form for that risk. So we created a program this year for premium pay. It was for frontline employees. It was the police department, fire department, really all frontline employees. So it wasn't just police and public safety, it was other frontline employees. The police department, without that hazard pay, they came in basically right at budget. And that's a drastic improvement from what we've seen, in previous years. Even just 2 years ago, they spent over $50 million of overtime. This year, they spent about 32. So with all other expenses in the budget, the police department, even with some of the cuts that were put into place in fiscal 21, they ended up right on budget. The hazard pay that hit them was not their decision. That was a citywide decision. So that put them over by about $6.5 million. And so we chose to use general fund revenue to cover that cost. Other agencies also had some premium pay expenses hit their budget, but they were able to absorb it without going over their appropriation. On the convention center item, that one was early on in the pandemic. The convention center made a request through the CARES Act funding that we had to do some technology improvements to the building, and also just some general building improvements. And the idea is that in order to encourage eventually visitors to come back to our convention center, we were going to need better technology so that we could bring people in virtually as well as in person. and also improvements to the building to make it safer. So one of the items they did was a better air circulation system to make the air quality safer for folks during the pandemic. So that was paid for in full by CARES Act on that item. The third one, I think, was the planning. If I'm remembering correctly, the planning was the third one. And that one was the cost of the city's feeding programs. So the city, the planning department, early on in the pandemic took the lead on what we would call feeding programs. And the idea there was we wanted to get food to folks that were in challenging situations, either financially or for health reasons. And so we had programs where we were delivering food to neighborhoods. And those program costs will be reimbursed by FEMA ultimately. So we've received partial reimbursement so far, but our expectation is that we will get reimbursed through FEMA for those costs. So those are the three items. Again, it's a larger package than usual because of all of the COVID-19 response that we put into place during fiscal 21, none of which we really could have anticipated at the time the budget passed. And so this package gets us legally in balance. As a whole, the general fund still ends with a small surplus, which is great news. So we had to use CARES money and FEMA money to pay for some of these response costs. But our revenue did improve just enough in the fourth quarter that we ended up just barely in balance with all other expenses. So that's the package of items that you see coming to the board today.
Thank you, Bob, for your presentation.
Sure.
At this point, are there any questions, concerns from members of the board to BBMR? At this point, I would like to yield the floor over to Comptroller Henry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Mr. Senemy. I just want to make sure I get some clarity on two of those last supplementals. The 7.1 million for the Department of Planning, that is money that right now we are addressing out of general funds, but you're expecting to do FEMA reimbursement eventually.
That's correct. So there was one supplemental for planning from FEMA funds because we have received partial reimbursement. There was the additional $7.1 million that you're referring to. We have not gotten reimbursed for that yet, but we expect to.
Okay.
And so because those expenses were incurred in fiscal 21, we had to use general revenue to cover that shortfall.
And just a quick question about that. Just out of curiosity, why was the food insecurity response coming out of the Department of Planning, which I don't generally think of as a service delivery agency?
So the Department of Planning has a small food policy group. So
Okay.
that was why they were the lead on it. Now there were other agencies assisting with like the distribution, general services, rec and parks, but the cost of the program was driven by the Department of Planning.
That's it. I had forgotten about the food policy group. That makes sense. And then the 1.5 million for the convention center, that didn't have anything to do with the COVID testing center in the convention center, right?
No, it didn't. It did not. So, we know the convention center was used as a testing location, but this was actually allocation of CARES money for them to improve the building for COVID response. So no, that particular piece didn't have anything to do with the testing location.
So this was like I know they did a complete revamp of the air filtration system,
Right.
and they put in a much more rigorous, robust filtering system.
That's
It
right.
would be that kind of work.
Yeah, that is this work and some technology improvements, like I said, to enable, for future conventions, if you had a mix between in-person and virtual, that they could better, meet those clients' needs going forward.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Comptroller. At this point, are there any
Sure.
other questions or concerns from members of the board? Hearing and seeing none, there was a protest. It came in late, but as we always attempt to ensure that the public has access to this board and has the opportunity to provide any questions or concerns in front of the board. We're going to allow, not as a formal protest, but we're going to allow Jed Weeks from Bikemore to come on and communicate, I guess, his position or their position associated with page 72 BPD hazard pay. Mr. Weeks, are you on?
Yep, I'm here. Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks for allowing us to speak today despite the late submission. Good morning, members of the Board of Estimates and Mr. President. Exactly a year ago, we wrote in protest of another appropriation of $2 million from the Baltimore City Circulator to Baltimore Police. At the time, we were told that this was a one-time transfer needed due to unexpected costs resulting from the COVID-19 response. But here we are a year later with the knowledge that the pandemic and related expenditures would continue with yet another supplemental appropriation for the police department. And to be clear, our real concern here is the source of funds for the supplemental appropriation. Speed and red light cameras have been well studied across the country and in our state, and they are clearly shown to reduce injury, crashes, and deaths of people walking, biking, riding transit, and driving. They're a proven, effective enforcement tool that can be deployed without racial bias and without threat of armed police escalating traffic enforcement into a violent encounter. The city should be doing everything in its power to expand these systems and increase their fairness, including removing geographic restrictions that can lead to inequitable placement and developing income-based fines that don't disproportionately harm drivers with fewer means. These steps would increase trust and faith in a program that saves dozens of lives and reduces thousands of injuries per year in our city. Revenues generated by speed and red light cameras under state law are to be used for public safety improvements, including pedestrian safety programs. The intent here is clearly for revenue of cameras to be used for physical improvements to infrastructure that slow down cars, make roads safer, and reduce the need for cameras to exist for enforcement altogether. And just to be clear here, our state delegation is actively working on even further clarifying that language to restrict these revenues to complete streets due to the abuse of jurisdictions taking this money for police enforcement. So allocating these funds towards police patrol makes a mockery of the state's law's intent to make public safety improvements. Many community members are already skeptical of cameras, and this reallocation endorses the fear that cameras are used purely for revenue generation and not to finance life-saving permanent improvements to our roadways. And the strong benefit of reducing racial bias and violent police encounters through automated enforcement is completely thwarted when the funds are used to supplement a police department that has demonstrated racial bias and escalation to violence in its policing. Traffic violence and air pollution caused by traffic kill over 900 Baltimoreans per year. That's an annual death rate comparable to the COVID-19 pandemic, comparable to our overdose deaths, and almost 3 times our homicide rate. Despite this public health crisis caused by drivers and their vehicles, Baltimore City Department of Transportation remains woefully underfunded, and the budget for life-saving interventions is non-existent compared to the scale of investment our city is making in fighting these other crises. So we understand the extraordinary budget challenges brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic and are accepting that some automated enforcement dollars may need reallocation toward agencies facing the pandemic's effects head-on, like our police department, also seen on today's agenda. Our fire department, also seen on today's agenda. But we can't accept the continued theft of desperately needed transportation dollars by the Baltimore City Police Department. If approved, this transfer will disproportionately harm our poorest Black and Latino residents, who are Baltimoreans risking their lives walking, biking, and riding public transit to work in a pandemic through a city that unjustly over-polices them based on the color of their skin. So we urge you all to reject this transfer. And thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask me.
No, thank you, Mr. Weeks, for coming on today and providing a testimony. At this point, are there any questions or concerns from members of this board? Mr. Comptroller, the floor is yours.
Well, I think that Mr. Weeks raised an issue of, was there an alternative source of money that we could have used to provide the supplemental for the police? I get how supplementals work. I get that the money has already been spent. I get that this is largely an accounting issue. Is there another pot that we could have taken the money from that would not have put us in this position where we really are kind of bending the intent of how that money is supposed to be used?
So, per my fuller briefing yesterday, there was really only 3 main sources where we had significant revenue surpluses in fiscal 21. Income tax, transfer and recordation revenue, and traffic camera revenue. Because we had multiple items that were not yet reimbursed or were not eligible for reimbursement, we had to use basically almost every nickel of those available sources for these supplementals. We chose to use the traffic camera because it is eligible. Public safety is defined broadly in the law. And so that was why we chose that one for the police supplemental in particular. But again, the key point here is the city has to end each year balanced as a whole and by agency. The city made a decision to prioritize premium pay and hazard pay to keep our employees safe. It was not just the police department, it was the fire department, public works, transportation. There were many employees across a lot of agencies that received those monies. This one happened to put the police department over because they were right on budget with all their other spending. And, we had to balance that at year end. I think the other comments from the protest, kind of linking all these other things, it's not relevant for this particular instance. This was just an accounting transaction to close the year in balance. So that's our perspective, and I would ask that the board, continue and approve this item.
So to follow up on that, I guess looking at the fact that there are other items in which we are technically using general funds to close out the year, but we are expecting eventual FEMA reimbursement. For taking the food insecurity program, for example, if we get $7.1 million of FEMA money at some point in the next couple of months, will we take that money and put it into the transportation and transit related costs that we would have spent this camera revenue on if we hadn't needed to use it to cover the BPD's shortfall?
So not necessarily. So again, fiscal 22 is a new year, and we're certainly not out of the woods yet with this pandemic. We're still, seeing, like I told the council committee yesterday, still seeing, shortfalls in parking related revenues and hotel tax specifically. The Delta variant now that's here is kind of extending this pandemic, unfortunately. So we're not seeing kind of the recovery that we expected from tourism. So we were able to cover some of these expenses in 21 with the general fund, and you're correct in that we will get reimbursement that will come in as receipts into the general fund in fiscal 22. But it's premature to say what we can spend those on. We might have additional response costs that we have to cover with those revenues in fiscal 22. So I think at this point it's just premature to say how fiscal 22 will look. We haven't even finished our first quarter projection yet. I'd also mention that what we shared in more detail with the council committee yesterday is we do have some outstanding legal liabilities that we have to be mindful of. That I know when there's extra money, everybody wants to spend it on their particular thing, but our office has a citywide responsibility to make sure we can pay for things that are general liability of the city that we know of. And so working with the law department, there are a handful of things out there that could come due within the next 1 to 2 years that we think it's more prudent to kind of set those dollars aside to cover those first. And then, if we ever had that excess revenue beyond what we needed to cover those, we would certainly look to programs like transportation or other capital improvements or other one-time things and make improvements in those areas.
Actually, I appreciate you bringing that up because we had a great deal of discussion in my office after we had our briefing on these, on specifically the one of the outstanding legal liabilities, the suit that the city is currently dealing with for ADA compliance, and we had noted that the annual costs of the capital improvements that would be needed to address that issue were strikingly similar to the annual revenue of the traffic cameras. And we were wondering if maybe that's something that we should be looking at in terms of simply nailing that down as a sadly sustainable source of revenue for that particular potential legal liability of the cities.
I wish it were that easy, but the traffic camera revenue today we get, it's a general fund revenue source. So it's covering things that we're already doing today. It's not covering things that we might have to do or would like to do. So could we reallocate directly from one to the other? No, because that would open up a hole in another part of the budget where, those traffic camera revenues are supporting other parts of the budget. So, we're in just very early conversations with law and transportation about what the correct action will be for that particular suit, and just we're in the early stages of making estimates of what it would cost and how we should handle that. So I don't have anything more at this point to share on that because it's pretty early. We just learned about it, I think, within the last month or so.
Mr. President, I have no further questions. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Comptroller. At this time, are there any additional questions or concerns from other members of the board? Hearing and seeing none, I'm going to entertain a motion. I'm wondering, unless there's some objection, if we just hear all four together. We're just going to roll them all up as part of this carryover. So that would be pages 54 through 55, the fiscal 21 carryover. Actually, the page 72, the BPD hazard pay, page 79, the convention center, and page 83, the food supplemental. Again, these are all items that are directly related to it closing out fiscal year. It's what Bob just kind of went over the details for. I believe all of us have received briefings directly from BBMR. And if I hear no objections, we can just roll them all up as four and have one vote. Does anyone have any questions or concerns regarding that strategy? Hearing and seeing none from the board, I'll entertain a motion to hear all four items and for us to vote them out. I saw the mouth of our city solicitor, but I couldn't hear him. Is that? You're still on mute, city solicitor.
And not only was on mute, I closed out my whole camera. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you and see.
All right. I move the approval of all four items.
I second.
So it's been moved and properly seconded for us to vote on all four items. At this point, we've got the motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The ayes have it. The fiscal year 21 carryover recommendations have been approved, including the three that we pulled off, just for the record: page 72, BPD hazard pay, page 79, convention center, and on page 83, the food supplement. At this point, the supplemental budget items will next be introduced as legislative package, which will take Baltimore City Council approval. Mr. Sinemi, thank you so much for walking us through these items. Thank you yesterday for presenting them to the Ways and Means Committee, and we look forward to continued discussion. So for the general public, there is additional opportunity for you to share any questions or concerns that you might have regarding the fiscal year 21 carryover items. At this point, are there any questions or concerns from other members of the board before we close out? Hearing and seeing none, there's no new business before the desk or before this board. We will recess until bid opening at 12 noon. The Board of Estimates will reconvene on Wednesday, September the 22nd at 9 a.m. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. Baltimore, we love you.